Welcome to English 4E. This is term 1B, and we are on class 7. Today we are looking at assignments. Oh, it says K9 and K10, but I had just taken off. We're only going to get to K9 today. It's kind of gone too long. And we're looking at paragraph writing. We won't get to clauses today either. This is Jillian Percy, and here are all the ways to contact me. Okay, the studio number is 1-800-465-7144. The office number is 1-800-667-3703, and the extension is 2211. If you want to fax in some work, 1-800-463-7852. My email, the main one I use, is jillian.percy@nnec.on.ca. And then I also have jillian.percy@nnecschools.org. My Facebook is capital G, capital P, ERCY, space capital WAHSA, and you can see below you've got kind of like a festive little fall scene there with my happy little avatar. So if you see that, you're on the right spot. And then my YouTube is the same address, but obviously over on YouTube. This has all the courses that I've done for WASA, so this year and last year. And then there's the alternate one is the WASA Distance Education YouTube channel. This is kind of an Uber channel that has all the courses from this year from all the different teachers. So if you're taking a bunch of courses from us right now, that can be kind of your one-stop shop to find everything rather than having to kind of bounce around to different teachers' YouTube channels. So just letting you know that that's an option out there, okay? Work. Whenever you hand in work, please send it to studentwork@nnec.on.ca. You can also CC me in the email if you want to be doubly safe, jillian.percy@nnec.on.ca. That way the secretary can log that you submitted the work and then it's in our computer. If you send it only to me, then it's attached to my personal stuff. And if I moved on, or something happened to me, then no one else will be able to access it. So you really want to make sure that it goes to the secretary as well. Please make sure your full name, the course name, the assignment number and name is on there. If an assignment asks for both a rough draft and a good draft, please label which is which and include them both in the same email. Just last night I was trying to mark somebody's stuff and the rough draft is worth 10 marks, the good copy is worth 20 marks. They didn't label which one they were handing in. I don't know, so I couldn't mark it. So please do that because it does delay the marking quite a bit if I have to send it back to you to get labeled. If you need to take a photograph of an assignment, please make sure it's clear enough so that your writing can be read. Once you've taken the picture, please download it to your phone or your computer, save it, and then when you send me an email, send it as an attachment. If you send it directly as an email, it comes in huge and it's very hard to shrink and get down on a piece of paper and show it properly. And I have to use the print version, right? I print it, then I mark it up, then I scan it, send it back to you, all that kind of stuff. So it adds a lot of extra steps if you don't save it. Okay, we are at the end of this week. We are getting to K9. I thought we were going to get to K10, but I don't think we are. And next week we will tackle K10 on the Monday. Today's work. Oh, this is weird. I made a bunch of changes over the last half an hour, and I can see that some of them didn't save for some reason. I'm not sure what happened there. All right, so all this stuff about clauses we didn't get to, okay? We are going to review the paragraph format. We're going to introduce the concept of a narrative paragraph and its elements. We are going to apply our knowledge by writing a narrative paragraph. We're also going to look at the writing process. Okay. So I'm going to look at the assignment first, and then we'll kind of dive into all the concepts you need to do to understand the assignment. Oh, it says continued here, but I don't think it's continued. In approximately 1/2 page of writing, describe a funny experience you have had or have heard about in the last few months. In your paragraphs, use at least one adjective phrase and one adverb phrase to add color and variety to your writing. Remember to indent your paragraphs and also keep in mind the importance of good subject-verb agreement throughout. This is the marking rubric that I use. I believe this is out of 10. The journals are normally out of 10. I believe this one is out of 10 as well, but check your unit and see what it says. If it is out of 10, then each one of these categories counts for 2 marks. And I mention this because sometimes people get really, really focused on the language conventions, like spelling. They're like, oh, my spelling is terrible. It's okay if your spelling is terrible because spelling is only a small part of what I am looking for. Even if your spelling was terrible, every single word was wrong, it would still only count for like 20% of your mark. So it doesn't really matter. I am looking at that you understand what the question is and how to do paragraphs, that you look at relevant details and examples, that your communication skills are strong, that your length is good. Those are all way more important than just worrying about your spelling, okay? So don't panic about spelling. Not everybody's a good speller. I don't really, it's a small part of the mark, okay? So some of the basic concepts you need to understand to do this assignment is you make sure you understand adjectives and adverbs, which we've been talking about, basic sentence types, which we're going to talk about today, subject-verb agreement, which we talked about back in assignment number 2. Then we're going to be looking at writing process and the paragraph structure as the new things for today. So quick review of adjectives. Adjectives describe nouns or pronouns. In other words, adjectives describe or modify people, places, things, or ideas. They can describe age, color, size, shape, purpose, number, origins, material, quality, or opinions. And we're going over this because they want to make sure that you use adjectives in your writing, okay? We also discussed the royal order of adjectives, that determiners come first, things like that, the, these, your, this. Then we would have numbers or amounts. Then we put our opinions, then size, age, shape, color, origin, material, and then purpose. All right, adverbs. Adverbs generally describe or modify verbs, but they also describe or modify adjectives, other adverbs, and even really a whole sentence. There are 3 main types of adverbs. There are interrogative adverbs like who, where, what. There are negatives like no, never, not. And there are simple adverbs. Those are actually the biggest category. So the different categories of adverbs, we have adverbs of manner that tells you how something happens, adverbs of place that tell you where something happens, adverbs of time, when it happens, adverbs of frequency, how often it happens. There's also adverbs of duration, how long it goes on for. Adverbs of purpose explain the reason for things. Adverbs of degree are those things like barely, very, extremely. They're kind of a limiting type of adverb. And then conjunctive adverbs and focusing adverbs we don't really get into, but they do exist in case you are aware of them. Okay, subject-verb agreement. This is one of those key things that can be really easy to miss because this isn't always an issue in every single language. Although some languages have more things, like you have to worry about animate versus inanimate objects or feminine versus masculine objects. So for English, the big thing for subject-verb agreement is singular versus plural. So for most nouns, when we want to show that there's a plural, we simply add an S to the end of him to show there's more than one. So singular, 1 cup is just like a cup. And then plural, 2 cups, we add an S. But if the word already ends in an S, a CH, SH, or an X, then we add ES instead so that we can hear the extra sound. So singular, fox, plural, foxes. If the noun ends in a Y, we drop the Y and we change it to I, and then we add the ES. So singular for party, plural, parties. There are some nouns that have irregular plural forms. For example, child becomes children, goose becomes geese, mouse becomes mice, ox becomes oxen, woman becomes women. These types are often borrowed from other languages. These particular ones happen to be, I think most of these are Germanic actually, but that won't always be the case, it just happens to be these ones. All right. Now, verbs can also be singular or plural, but we don't show singular or plural verbs by adding an S or an ES. In fact, it is just the opposite, which is why it's so confusing. We never add an S to any plural form of the verb. So we run, you run, they run, there's no S there. In the singular form, we don't add an S for the first or second person, but we do for any third person. And third person is one of the most common formats, right? So first person, I'm the first person, run, there's no S. Second person is always you. You run, there's no S. But the moment we switch to third person, then we add an S for singular form. He runs, she runs, it runs, the dog runs. So weirdly in verbs, the singular is more likely to have the S at the end. And like I said, we never use an S to show the plural form. So what this means is you're never going to see an S on the end of a noun, like as a signaling that it's plural, and an S on the end of a verb at the same time. So you would never see the dogs runs, right? It wouldn't happen because we just don't do that in English. So singular nouns need a singular verb, plural nouns need a plural verb, right? So when they say subject-verb agreement, it means that they need to be the same. They need to both be singular or both be plural. So I can say the boy runs to the store because boy is singular and this form of runs is singular. And I can say the boys run to the store because boys is plural and this form of run counts as a plural. But here's an example. I have to eliminate one of the example. Here is an example that is wrong. The girl run to the playground. Okay. Now, hopefully you can hear that that's wrong, but that's not always possible. Not everybody can hear it. If you don't hear it, we're going to talk about the logical reason why it's wrong. Girl is singular. The third person singular form of the verb run should be runs. Instead, they've got a plural form. So you can't have singular noun and a plural verb. They don't agree, and I would need to fix it. And it's an easy fix. All I would have to do is add S to the end of run, and now it works. It's just one of those funny little tricky things about English that you need to be mindful of, okay? All right, sentence types. There are four main different types of sentences in English, and they're basically categorized by their goal or their intent. And here they are, declarative sentences. These sentences are always telling us something. Interrogative sentences. Interrogative sentences are asking us something. Imperative sentences. These sentences are commanding us or instructing us to do something. And then exclamatory sentences. These sentences express strong emotions. All right, we're going to go through them one by one. Declarative sentences. This is the most common sentence type, and the majority of your writing is going to use these. They end with a period, and they might tell us about all sorts of things. They might tell us about a fact. Today is Thursday. They might tell us a description. The sunset is a vivid orange and pink against the blue sky. They might tell us an opinion. I think that Denzel Washington is one of the best actors. They might tell us an explanation. In the life cycle of a frog, they begin as eggs, are birthed as tadpoles, transform to froglets, and finally become adult frogs. So those are declarative sentences, and they use a period. Yes, okay, good. Interrogative sentences. Basically, you're asking a question. Some interrogative sentences will start with specific question words, such as who, what, where, when, why, and how. Other interrogative sentences will use an inversion method of asking a question, where the verb and the subject flip places, okay? All interrogative sentences use a question mark at the end of the sentence to show that it is a question. So some question word ones would be like, who is your dad? Where is your house? When is school over? What was that man saying? Why are you sad? How did you build the shed so quickly? In the inverted method, normally the subject comes first and then comes the verb. Here they flip them. They put the verb first and then the subject. So, do you want some eggs? Have you finished your homework? Was he angry with his wife? Is it Saturday? Were you waiting for me long? Sometimes people find those hard to recognize because they're more used to seeing the question words, but those also count as questions and need to have a question mark at the end. Imperative sentences. They have two main types of purpose. Normally they say one, but I think it's confusing when we say that. They can be commanding you to do something, like somebody who's your boss or your parent. Go clean up your room, fix this paper. Or they could be instructing you, which is a little gentler. Like maybe they're trying to tell you how to cook something or fix something. There's actually two different types of punctuation that can be used with them. They could use a period, or they could use an exclamation point if the command is urgent or full of strong emotion. They kind of overlap with exclamatory sentences here, okay? Imperative sentences also do not follow the typical sentence structure of subject and then verb. For these types of sentences, the subject is always assumed to be you. It's always like somebody talking to that person. It's not written. We don't write, you do this, you go clean your room, you fix that paper. We just start with the verb. So the verb comes first, and it may look as if there is no apparent subject. This is one of those kind of unusual things in English, but the subject is presumed to be you. So some examples of some command sentences would be, go to your room, don't throw the trash on the ground, please get in line. Now here we've got a word in front of the verb, right? It's like a little politeness verb, please. But I could have just said get in line, right? It just sounds a little rude. Don't hurt him. There's another one where we've got like an adverb, or a negative adverb there. Do not hurt him. And then you can have instruction sentences. Mix the dry ingredients well. That's not so much a command. I mean, it is kind of a command, but it's more like they're trying to tell you what to do next. Remember to let the paint dry for at least 24 hours. And you can see with don't hurt him, I made an exclamation point because the idea is that somebody's feeling strongly. And sometimes that would happen, like if a drill sergeant is giving somebody an order, march up that hill, and they're yelling at you, you would use an exclamation point to show it. But a lot of times command sentences will just have a period at the end. All right, exclamatory sentences. These ones always express strong emotion, and they will always use an exclamation mark at the end. They can be as short as one word. They may sometimes be written in the declarative style, where you have the subject first and then the verb, but they can also be written in the imperative style, where the verb comes first. I wouldn't say no, and then subject, but then no subject, really. Subject is assumed. So declarative style, I might say things like, I love you. I can't wait for my birthday. Oh, you aren't welcome here. I am never going back there. This is an emergency, right? And all as you can see, there's stress. You could be happy. It could be excited. It could be anger. But as long as it's a strong emotion, you can use an exclamation point. Imperative style is where they're more of a command. Help, fire, get out of here. Run for your life. Don't touch the hot pan. So those are kind of a mixture of, they definitely are strong emotion, but they are kind of more said in a command type format. All right, sentence variety. Even though the majority of your paragraph is probably going to use declarative sentences, it's good to know about the other sentence types. They can be used if you're including dialogue in your paragraph, as people use all of these in our speech. For example, then I said, no way, and I used an exclamation point there. The doctor tried to get me to change. Stop treating yourself so badly. So here I'm using a declarative sentence, right? I mean, imperative sentence. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Do you mean that? Even in the main body of your paragraph, you can use a variety of sentence types as a way to increase your sentence variety and make your work more interesting. People may ask a rhetorical question as an introduction to a paragraph or as a technique to try and make a connection to the reader. For example, do you want to hear about the time I almost drowned? Oh, can you imagine how bad I felt? What was I thinking? And it kind of changes it so it sounds almost like they're talking directly to you. That wouldn't be appropriate in all types of writing, but it can be appropriate in some types. For the one we're doing today, we're doing like a funny paragraph about something that happened to you. So it might be perfectly appropriate to use a question in that way here. Imperative sentences can also be used as a rhetorical device to make the reader feel like you're talking directly to them. Remember this point later, as it is the key to my downfall. Don't make the same mistakes I did. Avoid walking down the streets at night if you don't want it to happen to you. It's pretty rare to use exclamatory sentences in academic writing, but there are some places where it can be appropriate. For example, if you were expressing a strong opinion or discussing an emotional time, then it would make sense. The day my brother died was the worst day of my life. I feel this is an outrage. It needs to change immediately. You don't want to overuse them though, because it can end up with people kind of not quite taking you seriously. Okay, so moving on to standard paragraph format, which we've talked about before. The standard format is you have a topic sentence at the beginning, and that introduces your topic, like what you're going to talk about or your opinion. And then you have 3 to 5 probably details. They might be where you're listing different pieces of information or different arguments or explaining your opinion. And it's the biggest part of the paragraph, right? And then your closing sentence restates or concludes your topic or an opinion. That's for a standard one. But how is a narrative paragraph different from a standard paragraph? Because they're not quite the same. Well, first of all, what is a narrative paragraph? A narrative is simply a story. It can be short or it can be long. It can be a true story, what we call nonfiction, or it could be made up, what we call fiction. A narrative paragraph tells a story in one or more paragraphs, but the whole point of the paragraph is that it's telling stories. It's not explaining something, and it's not giving you information or trying to convince you. It's trying to tell a story. Now, for the purposes of this assignment, the story needs to be funny and true. It doesn't have to happen to you, although I think it's easier to write about if it happened to you, but that's where we start. You need to make sure this is the kind of story that can be told in a half a page, right? You can go over that somewhat to a full page, but you wouldn't want it to be much longer than that because there's no point writing, 3 pages if you only need half a page. What are the elements of a narrative paragraph? Narratives all have similar elements that make them interesting to read, regardless of how long and how short it is or they are. A setting. A setting may be referenced only briefly, but the events need to happen somewhere and in some time frame. So over here you can see I've got mountains and we've got a valley, and like it could be a different season or it could be sometime in the past, or for this one you couldn't use the future, but some stories could use the future. Characters. Characters may have only 1 or 2 main characters. There might be quite a few characters. Problem or conflict. Usually there's some sort of problem to solve, either in the outside world or something inside the character themselves. And then plot. This is the series of events that are often told in chronological order that lead up to the exciting climax of the story. Okay, so here is an example of a narrative paragraph. My experiences on a hot summer day. It was the 22nd of June, perhaps the hottest day of the summer, when the temperature had soared to 44 degrees. The sun was shining brightly from the early morning. The earth was hot like a baking oven. I had to go out in the scorching heat to call in a doctor as my mother was sick. The roads were deserted. Plants and trees had withered away. Hot wind was blowing. It had added to the intensity of the heat. Life seemed to have come to a complete standstill. Animals were panting for breath. Birds were silent. Since I could not get any scooter or taxi, I had to walk on foot a distance of 2 kilometers. When I came back home with the doctor, I was completely shattered and exhausted. I also had a fever. The doctor said that it was a case of heat stroke. I remained in bed for a week. During my illness, I often thought of the poor laborers who had to work, both in winter and summer, and I wondered how they managed to bear the biting cold of winter and the scorching heat of summer. And that is from sample paragraphs for middle school students. I want to point out, I recognize this isn't funny. I'm just kind of giving you an example of a story format, okay? So we're going to work on that part. How do I make or write a funny story? I found that part kind of intimidating. I don't think I'm naturally a funny person, and I don't feel like if I am when I'm writing, I don't think I naturally am looking to make people laugh. So I found this kind of hard. So thinking about what makes something funny was when it happened, did it make you laugh? Or did it make other people laugh when it happened? If it didn't make you laugh at the time, does it make you laugh looking back at it? Um, Sometimes things that are funny can be unexpected, or it can be where you're kind of poking a little bit of fun at yourself, or someone else. There can be like a mismatch between what was planned and then what actually happens. One thing after another could go wrong in a very humorous way. Or sometimes there's just people that are really funny in it. Like some of my friends are just the type that are like, they're always joking and goofing around. And if they're around, you can almost guarantee something funny is going to happen because they're just that kind of a person, right? So before we dive in, we're going to talk about the writing process kind of really quick here. There's basically 5 stages to the writing process. So this is one of those goofy things when I create it in Canva, it goes perfectly. And then when I put it over into PowerPoint, I always like those. Okay, step 1, planning or brainstorming your ideas. Step 2, writing a rough draft. Step 3, revising to improve it. Step 4, editing. Step 5, publishing. So planning. In this stage, the writer's looking to think about and write down their ideas to help with planning the main goal or purpose of the writing. In planning to write a story, the main idea is to talk about the characters, the setting, the plot, rising and falling actions, along with the climax and conclusion to the story. Remember, that's true because it's a narrative, but other types of writing might have different things you're looking at. Drafting. In this stage, the writer is going to begin to put together the first rough draft of the story. In drafting the story, the focus is more on putting the ideas down on paper and not just about grammar or spelling just yet. Now, I want to point out, if you're good at grammar and spelling, please just spell things correctly. I know that I have some people who are deliberately making mistakes so they can fix them to prove that they fixed them. Please don't feel like you need to do that. I know some people are good spellers. You don't have to do that to try and show that you are fixing things. But some people, spelling's kind of a big hassle or grammar's a big hassle. And if they had to think about it all at once, it becomes too much of a problem, right? So do what works for you, but don't deliberately make mistakes, please, just to kind of try and show me that you're drafting things. Revising. In this stage, the writer is looking to improve the fluency of writing. I wouldn't just say the fluency, I would also say as well as the content and the writing style. Now, maybe they meant style when they talked about fluency, but I think of those as something different, right? You're looking at the readability, at how interesting it is. Does it make sense? You want to have your ideas and your descriptions all kind of come together so the reader has a better picture of what's happening in the story. And then the very final stage is editing. This is where you're looking at all the finicky, tiny little details. You're making sure there's no grammar or spelling mistakes, punctuation mistakes, capitalization mistakes that might affect how the reader will enjoy the story. This is kind of like if you've cleaned the whole house and then you suddenly kind of went through and, added a little bit of bouquet to the table or, tidied up some shoes. It's the small stuff. It's not the big stuff. Okay. Publishing, that's where you're handing the story in to me. In the real world, you might send it to a publishing house or to a magazine, or if you were creating a poster, now you put the poster up. Publishing is just kind of the final stage where it's like, oh, well, it's done now. I'm not going to be fixing any more things. Okay, so if you're planning your narrative paragraph, start with thinking about some funny stories or some incidents in your life. Grab a piece of paper and jot down some of those ideas. Which ones could be told in 1/2 to 1 full page of text? And think about, will it be funny to someone who wasn't there? I've got a story of, there's a time I remember that was absolutely hilarious to me and my brother, but I've told that story numerous times to other people, and it just isn't funny to other people because I think it had more to do with what mood we were in when those events happened. So it's not funny to anybody else but us. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is sometimes some stories don't translate. If you do have a funny story, think about what part was funniest. Was it their words, their actions, their reactions, the overall result? What part do you really want to emphasize in your story? Once you've got all that kind of thought about, pick which one works best, and then start to jot down some notes on the narrative elements. Your characters, the physical and personality traits, setting, when and where were you? The problem or the conflict. What were you trying to do or solve? Plot. What was the sequence of events? Message or theme. Was there a lesson learned or a moral or a new perspective? For those who like graphic organizers, this is kind of a little simple one I made up. Think about your people. Think about your setting. Think about what problem is going on, and then talk about the actual events from the beginning down to the end. This is just a rough kind of brainstorming. You're not filling out the whole story here, but this kind of jotting down the big things that you want to talk about, okay? Now, remember, a narrative paragraph does not start with an opening sentence that's kind of generic, the way we've gotten used to doing. It generally tries to pull your interest into the story and get you hooked on reading it. So the beginning sentence might start anywhere. It might be trying to convey the setting or the characters. It might be trying to set the tone or get across the genre, or even just start right with a problem, depending on what the writer's trying to accomplish. So we're going to look at some of the different ways a story might start, depending on the writer's choices and kind of what their overall purpose is. So sometimes we're a bit nervous about starting a narrative paragraph or a story, and we start in a very simple way, and it's factual, but it's not very exciting. So I might say, like, this is a funny story about the time we got lost in the woods. It's true. It's not a very interesting way to start the story, right? There are lots of more interesting ways to start a narrative paragraph. You can start with dialogue. The characters could already be talking about one of the main events. You could start with a flashback. One of the characters could be remembering some part of the incident and reliving it or retelling it to somebody else. Sound effects, depending on what happened, like accident stories maybe. Sometimes interesting sound effects can be a great way to start a story. Question, sometimes asking a rhetorical or a thought-provoking question can kind of draw your reader into the story. We talked about that a little bit. Action, you could dive unexpectedly right into the middle of the action to grab their attention. You'll see police procedurals do this, right? The story opens and someone's running down an alley being chased by somebody with a gun. You don't know who they are, you don't know what's going on, but they've immediately captured your attention. Characters, if there's any interesting or unusual characters, you might introduce them right away. If there's something mysterious, you might start with something mysterious or unusual that makes the reader want to find out more. Okay, so I'm going to use my graphic organizer here and start to try and fill it out for a story that I'm thinking about telling. It's a true story about falling in the lagoon. It's kind of sad at the time, but I think it's kind of funny in retrospect. Okay, so people, who's there? Me, I'm in my 30s, tall, dark-haired, I'm new to the area, a little bit impulsive, probably should have thought things through a little bit more. And there's a dog. I know it's not necessarily people, but it does count as a character. I should change this to say characters. It sounds funny, but you know what? In this story, the dog is definitely an important character, and that can happen, right? Okay. The dog was yellow, very excitable, probably not too smart, although I don't feel like I won any points for being intelligent for this one myself, quite frankly. Setting, where was I? I was in an isolated woods, I was far from the main town, and I was near a lagoon, clearly. Now I'm saying present, I don't mean it just happened right now. What I mean is it didn't happen in the far past, like in, the Great Depression or during a war or Egyptian times. It didn't happen in the future. So present day means kind of this time period. It doesn't mean it happened right this week. It was maybe about 15 years ago and it was in winter. The winter part is really important to the story, okay? What was the problem? Well, I fell into a lagoon trying to rescue a dog, and then I had to try to figure out how to rescue myself. So I would write down my plot events. I'm not gonna do all of them, but I'm gonna kind of start one just to get us going to show you what I mean. Where's my time? I'm okay for time. Okay, so I might say, went for a walk, a dog joined me. Okay, now I want to point out, this is not a complete sentence, right? Because this is just for me. This isn't the part you're handing in. This is just where you're kind of thinking about all your ideas. So you don't want to write perfect sentences here because you don't want to bother, wasting your time doing it all here. This isn't the part I'm going to mark. This is just for you to get some ideas and then take your ideas and move forward and write your rough draft. So I'm gonna go on and do a few more just to kind of give myself something to start with. Oops, hang on a sec. And then let's see, took a new road to go see the lagoon. Dog ran ahead of me. Okay, and then what happened? Dog fell into the lagoon, got scared, and could not get out. Okay, so that's kind of my starting point. I would fill this all in, but it will take me too long if I do that right now. Okay, once I have that, I then kind of start to take those events and try to turn them into an interesting story. Okay, this is kind of the hard part. I feel like if you plan this out, it gets easier, but still doing the rough draft still tends to be the hard part. All right, so hopefully here's my story. One day when I was first living in the north, I took a lovely walk in the woods by myself. That was my first mistake. I wasn't really familiar with the area and was just walking around aimlessly until I heard a dog barking furiously. As I turned around the corner, I found out why. He was stuck in the water lagoon. There was a lovely layer of snowfall all around, but the water in the lagoon was not yet frozen. As I attempted to lean down and pull the dog out, I lost my footing and slid down the slick, wet, rubbery bank of the lagoon as if I were snowboarding. I landed in water deeper than my winter boots and felt the water seep in, numbing my toes. I hastily turned around and attempted to climb back up the bank. I might as well have been trying to climb the air for all the success I had. The wet, slick slope was just impossible to get traction on. Next to me, the dog whimpered and whined. The sky was beautiful with tinges of pink and red, hinting at the sunset to come. At this point, the true horror of my situation had sunk in. I had told no one where I was walking, and this was not my usual walking trail. There were no houses around. If I could not get myself out of here soon, I was going to end up spending the night in a freezing cold lagoon, while my feet slowly turned into an icy version of concrete. Finally, I noticed a seam in the rubber lining. There was a 1-inch overlap between the one side and the next. I jammed my fingers underneath that seam and slowly inched my way up that 4-foot bank with all the seriousness of a Mount Everest climber. I sobbed with relief when I made it to the top. The dog barked furiously and then in one frenzied leap threw himself out of the lagoon and raced ahead of me. He had never needed to be rescued at all. I walked home wet, crying and humiliated at my own stupidity. Okay, so that's my rough draft. Now I go to the revision stage. Revising my rough draft, you always want to focus on content first. Sometimes people, the only thing they're looking at is like spelling mistakes, but that's really not this stage. Here we're looking at the bigger things, okay? Does it make sense? Are there important details missing? Can I picture the setting? Can I picture the characters? Does the order of the events work or should it be rearranged? How is the style? Do the sentences flow into each other? How's the vocabulary? Do the words paint a strong picture? I'm looking at the big stuff right now. So when I looked back at the big stuff, here were my ideas for what I needed to fix. I don't know if I described the setting very well. Could the audience picture it in their head? I don't feel like I described the characters, me or the dog, very well either. And I don't know if it comes across funny. It's one of those stories that always makes people laugh when they hear it, but I feel like it's kind of lost something when it's written down. Because I feel like the funny part is, like, at first it's quite serious, right? I was really scared. But the funny part is it all happened because I thought the dog was stuck and the dog turned out not to be stuck. And somehow that, to me, and to most people I tell the story to, it kind of turns it on its head and makes it kind of funny, right? Because it didn't need to have happened at all. So how to get that across in writing, I'm not sure. That's kind of tricky, right? So looking next, right. Sometimes people get the editing stage and the revision stage mixed up. They focus on editing. Editing is spelling, punctuation, capitalization, but you should be focusing on revising first. Remember, those conventions, all that spelling and grammar stuff, that only counts for 20% of your mark, right? The other 80% is based on your ideas, your format, your organization, your writing style, your storytelling. This is the main part of your mark. And that's why this is the stuff we look at first in the revising stage, which is why it's so important, okay? So here I took the first half and then I began to sort of try and fix things. Basically, what happens to a lot of people, and it happened to me too, is sometimes you kind of dive in and you can picture yourself and you can picture where you were. So you don't spend a lot of time explaining what you look like or where you were and how it looked. And what happens is people can't picture it then. Right? So even now looking at this, I feel like, oh gosh, I really didn't add enough information. And that's a big mistake because what you want is people to be able to picture it right away because that grabs people. When it's just words and they can't picture things, people just aren't as interested. But here's what I did the first time. When I was much younger and not so careful, I took a long Sunday stroll off into the bush with a stray dog that decided to follow along. He was a beautiful golden retriever type, and his cheerful company made me feel safe and protected. Boy, did I get that wrong. He raced happily ahead of me and turned around a corner out of sight. Suddenly, his desperate howls filled the air. I followed the sound and stood dumbstruck at the sight. He had fallen into the lagoon and could not get out again, despite his frantic efforts. I hurried forward in my big winter boots across the layer of snow and leaned forward to haul him up to safety. To my horror, I snowboarded my way down that slope straight into the lagoon myself. The icy water came over the tops of my boots and turned my legs numb. I quickly turned around and tried to climb up the bank. Every attempt had me sliding backwards down the ramp, straight back into the icy water. Next to me, my sidekick turned booby trap, whimpered and whined in fear. So now I think I'm painting a clearer picture, and I feel like I'm trying to use some language that is maybe more humorous. Like when I'm talking about, boy, did I get that wrong, I'm kind of making fun of myself, but I'm also trying to give you a kind of hint that things are about to turn bad. Um, my sidekick turned booby trap. Those are kind of, I don't know, silly, goofy things to me. I don't know if it works. It's kind of, I found this is a really hard assignment. Not really worth a whole lot of marks, but it's important because we are going to be writing a story at the end. So it's a good time to practice, right? The sky turned beautiful shades of pink and gold as my thoughts turned dark. I had no clue how to get out of this lagoon, but no one even knew I was out here. There was no chance of a rescue. If I didn't get out of here soon, my feet would be so frozen they would resemble stone. I examined the bank, trying to see if the rubber mat could be pulled back somewhere to reveal dirt that might be easier to climb. No luck. But then I spotted a 1-inch wide seam that ran from top to bottom and joined one section of the rubber covering the other. I jammed my fingers under that seam with no regard for the pain, and I used it like a rope line to climb Mount Everest. When I got to the top, I just about cried. I was so glad to be out of there. I turned to look at the stray who had led me into the lagoon. He was barking frantically. I could not think how to get him back out without falling back into the lagoon myself. I turned away sadly and heard his barks and whimpers escalate horribly. Then I heard a large splash and was amazed to see this wet, bedraggled dog leap up that side of the lagoon bank like a soldier scaling an obstacle wall. He raced past me back towards town while I stood there in disbelief. He had never needed to be rescued at all. I trudged back to town in my soaking wet boots, shaking my head at my own foolishness. Okay, so that's my version. Now, at this point, I would go back and I would look at all the finicky stuff. I would look for my spelling mistakes. I would look for punctuation mistakes. I would look for capitalization mistakes. I would check for grammar, usage errors. Remember they talked about subject-verb agreement. Oh, I would also try to make sure that if I hadn't yet, they aren't the conventions, but for this case, remember that they want to make sure that we've got adjectives and adverbs. So make sure there's some in there. Once you've finally edited it to your satisfaction, then it's ready for the last stage, which is publishing. In this case, publishing just means you send it along to me, right? That's really all it is. So let's take a look back. I don't think I fixed everything. Okay, I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger just because it's easier to kind of play around with it when I do that. I'm gonna keep an eye on the time so that my colleague can get in here when he wants to. Oh, yeah, sorry, that didn't work. Hang on, let me try that again. Okay. Okay. So I had no clue how to get out of this lagoon. But I had to. This isn't really editing, but it's bothering me. Well, let me do it, but I had to because no one even knew I was out there. There was no chance of a rescue. Now, here's a place where if I wanted to, I could put an exclamation point. Remember how we talked about sentence variety? That's one spot where I could do it. If I didn't get out of here soon, my feet would be so frozen they would resemble stone. I examined the bank trying to see if the rubber mat could be pulled back to reveal dirt that might be easier to climb. Now, I don't like this because it doesn't make sense, I feel like, period. But I was out of luck. Okay. Now, here's the thing. I like that. I like how it sounds, but let's be honest, that is an incomplete sentence. But I was out of luck doesn't work. I actually need to join that in. I'm gonna put a comma there. And then a B. Because but doesn't start a sentence all by itself, it would be an incomplete sentence unless there was a second half. Then I've got but again, which I don't like. And I know it's finicky, but I'm going to take it out. I'm going to say not but, maybe suddenly. Suddenly? Suddenly, I spotted. Now I don't want to have suddenly and then because they're both transition words and it doesn't make sense to have both of them, right? Suddenly, comma, I spotted a 1-inch wide seam. And I'm going to use a hyphen to connect those. A 1-inch wide. So I'm kind of using it as a descriptive adjective, right? A 1-inch wide seam that ran from top to bottom. Oh, here's another one where I would add some hyphens. Top to bottom. All right, it's kind of a little phrase. That ran from top to bottom. I'm going to say not join, but joining. Joining one section of the rubber covering to the other side. Okay. Now, as I'm talking about a seam, but seam is maybe not the word I'm wanting. I can't think of what it was there. There was kind of like this extra little part sticking out, but I can't think of what to call it. So if I was writing this and I was going to hand it in, what I might do, because I'm not happy with this word, what I might do, is I would underline it, right? And then when I was looking back over it, I would know, hey, I wasn't happy about that word. I need to take a quick look and see if I can think of a better word than seam. Yeah, I don't know. I can't think of a 1-inch wide seam of material sticking out, Yeah, I'm not crazy about that. It's a very long sentence and I think it's a bit wordy. That's part where I would kind of go back over. So when you're editing, you're going back, you're looking for the small stuff, but like, just like me, if you find stuff that you think, that could be fixed, then go ahead and go back and fix it, okay? Sometimes people will say, well, I couldn't find any mistakes, and I have to be honest, I never quite believe it when people tell me that, because I can always find mistakes in my own writing, okay? And I've usually spent ages on that stuff. There's always ways to improve your writing. There's better words, there's better sentences, there's better description. There really is just always things you can do. So please take your time with this smaller version, this smaller assignment, because it gets you ready for the bigger assignment that we're going to be doing later on, okay? That is it for today. There's no more classes this week. I will join you guys again on Monday and we'll look at assignment 10, okay? Good luck. If you need any help, give me a phone call. I will be here later on today and also tomorrow.